The whispers started the moment Judith Raines stepped off the stagecoach in Fort Stanton, New Mexico, her considerable frame causing the entire vehicle to shift as she descended, and she could already see the knowing glances exchanged between the cluster of townspeople gathered near the general store on that sweltering August afternoon in 1877. Judith had traveled 3 weeks from her aunt's failing boarding house in St. Louis, carrying everything she owned in 2 worn carpetbags and a trunk that had belonged to her late mother. At 23 years old, she stood nearly 6 feet tall with broad shoulders, strong arms, and a build that her aunt had called unfortunate for a woman seeking marriage prospects. The telegram from her distant cousin, Emily, had promised work at a dress shop, a fresh start in a territory where her past would not follow her like a shadow. But as Judith looked around the dusty main street of Fort Stanton, taking in the weathered storefronts and suspicious stares, she wondered if anywhere could truly offer the acceptance she desperately craved. A woman in a lavender dress clutched her parasol tighter and leaned toward her companion, whispering behind a gloved hand. 2 men loading supplies onto a wagon paused their work to openly assess Judith from head to toe, their expressions ranging from curiosity to poorly concealed mockery. Even the stage coach driver, who had been perfectly cordial during their journey, seemed eager to unload her belongings and depart without the customary pleasantries he had extended to the other passengers. Judith straightened her spine, a gesture she had perfected over years of enduring such scrutiny. She refused to let them see how their judgment cut into her, how every sideways glance reminded her of the countless times she had been told she was too much, too large, too unfeminine to be truly desirable. Her cousin Emily was supposed to meet her at the stage stop, but the small crowd contained no familiar faces, only strangers who seemed to have already formed their opinions about the oversized woman who had just arrived in their modest town. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, and sweat trickled down her back beneath the layers of her traveling dress. Fort Stanton sat in a valley surrounded by pine-covered mountains, and while the elevation provided some relief from the brutal temperatures of lower desert regions, August still brought an intense sun that seemed to leach the moisture from everything it touched. Judith shaded her eyes and searched the street for any sign of Emily, trying to ignore the persistent stares that followed her every movement. A sharp voice cut through the afternoon air. "Well, I never." Emily said her cousin was coming, but she certainly did not mention the girl's size. How is she supposed to fit behind a sewing machine? She will probably break every chair in the shop. The speaker was a thin woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, her lips pressed into a disapproving line. She stood with 2 other women outside what appeared to be a mercantile, making no effort to lower her voice. Judith felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the August sun. She had heard variations of such comments throughout her entire life, but they never became easier to bear. Each one was a fresh wound, a reminder that her body was considered an offense to proper feminine sensibilities. Before Judith could formulate a response or decide whether to simply ignore the cruel words, a different voice rang out, deep and commanding. "Mrs. Henderson, I am surprised to hear such uncharitable words from someone who claims to read her Bible every Sunday. Perhaps you should revisit the passages about kindness to strangers." Judith turned to find the source of this unexpected defense. A man stood near the hitching post outside the saloon, one boot propped on the wooden rail, his thumbs hooked casually in his belt. He wore the practical attire of a working rancher. Dusty denim trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, a leather vest darkened with age and wear, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across a face that appeared to be in its late 20s. Even from a distance, Judith could see the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days engaged in hard physical labor. His stance radiated a quiet confidence, and when he pushed away from the rail and walked toward her, she noticed how the crowd seemed to part instinctively, granting him deference. Mrs. Henderson sputtered indignantly. "Adam Irving, I will not be spoken to in such a manner. I was merely making an observation. Your observations are better kept to yourself, madam." Adam's tone remained polite but firm. He stopped a few feet from Judith and touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Miss, I apologize for the poor welcome you have received. Fort Stanton usually has better manners than what you have witnessed today." Up close, Judith could see that Adam Irving had sun-weathered skin, dark brown eyes that held both intelligence and warmth, and a strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble. A thin scar traced a line from his left eyebrow to his temple, a mark that spoke of past dangers faced and survived. He looked at her directly, meeting her eyes with an openness that felt startlingly rare. Most people either stared at her body with judgment or avoided looking at her altogether, but this stranger regarded her as simply another human being deserving of basic respect. "Thank you," Judith managed, her voice rougher than she intended. "I am Judith Raines. I am here to meet my cousin Emily Thornton. She works at the dress shop." Adam nodded. "I know Emily. Good woman, fair hand with a needle. Her shop is just down the street, but I saw her heading toward the church about an hour ago. Reverend Walker's wife was feeling poorly and Emily went to help tend to her. She probably lost track of time." He glanced at Judith's belongings, still piled near the stage stop. "Those yours?" "Yes, all of it. Let me help you get them to the dress shop. You can wait there in the shade until Emily returns." Adam did not wait for permission. He simply picked up the heavy trunk that had required 2 men to load onto the stagecoach, hoisting it onto his shoulder with apparent ease, then grabbed one of the carpet bags with his free hand. Judith quickly retrieved her remaining bag and followed him down the dusty street, acutely aware of the eyes that tracked their progress. She could already imagine the gossip that would spread through Fort Stanton by nightfall. The oversized woman arriving from back east, already in the company of Adam Irving, one of the area's most successful ranchers, according to the conversation she had overheard during the stage journey. The dress shop occupied a narrow building between a saddle maker and a lawyer's office. Cheerful blue curtains hung in the windows, and a hand-painted sign announced Thornton's Fine Dressmaking and Alterations in elegant script. Adam set the trunk down on the shop's small porch and placed the carpet bag beside it, then turned to face Judith with an expression of consideration. "Miss Raines, I hope you will not judge Fort Stanton too harshly based on today's reception. Most folks here are decent, but they can be slow to warm to outsiders. Give them time." Judith found herself studying this unexpected defender, trying to understand his motivation. "Why did you help me? You don't know anything about me." Adam shrugged, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I don't need to know your life story to recognize when someone is being treated poorly. Besides, my mother raised me to stand up for what is right, and there was nothing right about how Mrs. Henderson was speaking." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Truth is, I have little patience for people who think there is only one acceptable way for a person to look or be. The world would be a mighty boring place if we all fit the same mold." Before Judith could respond, the sound of rapid footsteps announced someone's arrival. A petite woman with honey-colored hair and a harried expression came rushing around the corner, her skirts kicked up enough to reveal sturdy work boots beneath. "Judith! Oh, my lord, Judith! I am so sorry," Mrs. Walker took a turn, and I completely lost track of time. I meant to be at the stage stop when you arrived. Emily Thornton threw her arms around Judith in an enthusiastic embrace, despite the significant difference in their sizes. They had not seen each other in over a decade, not since Judith's family had visited Emily's parents during a brief period of relative prosperity. Back then, they had been children, spending summer afternoons playing by a creek and constructing elaborate imaginary worlds. Now they were grown women, reunited by circumstance and the bonds of family. "It's fine, Emily. Mr. Irving was kind enough to help with my belongings." Judith returned the embrace, feeling some of the tension in her shoulders begin to ease. Emily pulled back and glanced at Adam with obvious fondness. "Adam, you are always looking out for everyone. Thank you for taking care of my cousin. It was no trouble." Adam touched his hat brim again, preparing to depart. "Miss Raines, I hope Fort Stanton treats you better from here on out." "Emily, always a pleasure." He started to walk away, then paused and looked back at Judith. "If you need anything, my ranch is about 5 miles north of town, the Irving place. Anyone can point you in the right direction." Judith watched him go, puzzled by the strange flutter in her chest. She had long ago resigned herself to a life without romance, convinced that no man would ever see past her size to the person beneath. Yet something in Adam Irving's direct gaze and easy manner had stirred feelings she thought she had buried years ago. Emily unlocked the shop door and began helping Judith carry her belongings inside. The interior was a testament to Emily's skill and good taste. Bolts of fabric lined shelves along one wall, a work table dominated the center of the room, and 3 dress forms stood like silent sentinels near the window. A doorway at the back led to what Emily explained were the living quarters, a small apartment consisting of a bedroom, sitting area, and compact kitchen. "You will stay with me, of course," Emily said, already moving Judith's trunk toward the back room. "The bedroom is small, but we can share it just like we did when we were girls. Unless you would prefer the sofa in the sitting area, but that seems unnecessarily uncomfortable when we have a perfectly good bed." "I don't want to impose," Judith began, but Emily waved away her concerns. "Impose?" "Judith, I have been lonely here. Fort Stanton is a good town, but I miss having family nearby. When I received your letter asking about work opportunities, I was thrilled, truly. The dress shop has more business than I can manage alone, and I trust your hand with a needle. Your mother taught you well." The mention of Judith's mother brought a familiar ache. She had died 3 years ago, a sudden fever that took her within days, leaving Judith alone with an aunt who viewed her as a burden. Working in her aunt's boarding house had been miserable, enduring not only her aunt's constant criticisms, but also the uncomfortable attention of male boarders who seemed to think a large woman should be grateful for any attention, no matter how crude or unwanted. Over the following days, Judith settled into a routine in Fort Stanton. She rose early to help Emily prepare the shop for customers, spent her days sewing and fitting garments, and gradually began to learn the rhythms of the small town. The work was satisfying, engaging both her skill and creativity, and Emily proved to be a considerate companion, filling the evenings with conversation and laughter. But the whispers persisted. Women who came to the shop for fittings often made thoughtless comments about Judith's size, wondering aloud how someone so large could have such delicate needlework skills, as if the two qualities were somehow mutually exclusive. Men on the street stared with either judgment or an uncomfortable sort of interest that made Judith's skin crawl. She heard herself described as "that big woman" more times than she could count, the words always carrying an undertone of disapproval or mockery. Mrs. Henderson seemed particularly determined to make Judith feel unwelcome. She spread rumors that Judith had come west to escape scandal, that no proper man back east would have her, that her size indicated laziness and gluttony. The accusations were baseless but persistent, and Judith found herself the subject of speculation and gossip wherever she went. 2 weeks after her arrival, Judith was walking back from the general store with supplies for the shop when she encountered a group of young men loitering outside the saloon. One of them, a sandy-haired ranch hand named Bill Tucker, called out to her, "Hey there, big girl. Why don't you come have a drink with us? I bet you can hold your liquor better than most men." His companions laughed, and another added, "She could probably hold all of us down with one hand. Maybe we should test that theory." Judith kept walking, her face burning, clutching the wrapped parcel of thread and buttons tighter against her chest. She had learned long ago that responding to such taunts only encouraged them. But as she passed, one of the men reached out and grabbed her arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "Don't be unfriendly now. We are just having a bit of fun. Let go of me." Judith tried to pull away, but the man held firm, his friends forming a loose circle around them. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fear mixing with anger and humiliation. "The lady asked you to let go." Adam Irving's voice cut through the tension like a knife. He had emerged from the saloon, his expression dark with anger. "I suggest you do so immediately, Tucker." Bill Tucker released Judith's arm but made no move to retreat. "We were just talking to her, Irving. No harm meant." "Then you have a strange way of showing it." Adam positioned himself beside Judith, his presence both protective and commanding. "Miss Raines deserves the same respect you would show any other woman in this town. If I hear about you or your friends bothering her again, we will have a much less pleasant conversation. Am I clear?" The threat in Adam's voice was unmistakable, and the ranch hands exchanged glances before muttering their agreement and dispersing. Judith found herself alone with Adam once again, her hands trembling slightly from the adrenaline rush. "Are you all right?" Adam's anger had softened into concern. "Did he hurt you?" "No, I'm fine, just shaken." Judith took a steadying breath. "Thank you, again. You seem to make a habit of rescuing me." "I make a habit of not tolerating bullies." Adam studied her face, and Judith became aware of how she must look, flushed, disheveled, eyes probably bright with unshed tears of frustration. "Miss Raines, may I walk with you back to the dress shop? I would feel better knowing you arrived safely." They walked in silence for a moment before Judith found her voice. "Why do you keep helping me, Mr. Irving? Most people in this town seem to find me either ridiculous or offensive. Most people in this town are fools." Adam's blunt response surprised a laugh out of Judith despite her distress. He glanced at her, his expression serious. "Miss Raines, can I speak plainly with you, I suppose? I own a ranch north of here. It's a good spread with strong water sources and decent grazing land. But running it requires hard work, and I mean truly hard work. I need help, not just hired hands to manage the cattle, but someone capable and strong to help with everything a ranch demands. My mother helped my father run the place until she passed 2 years ago, and since then I have struggled to keep up with everything. I need a partner, someone who is not afraid of physical labor, someone with strength and determination." Judith stopped walking, staring at him in confusion. "Why are you telling me this?" Adam met her gaze steadily. "Because when I saw you step off that stagecoach, I thought, there is a woman who looks like she could handle real work. And then I got to know you a bit, heard from Emily how skilled you are, how hard you work, and I realized something. I need a strong woman exactly like you here." The words hung in the air between them, and Judith felt her heart skip several beats. What exactly are you suggesting, Mr. Irving? I'm suggesting that perhaps you would consider coming to work at my ranch. I can pay fair wages, better than what you would make doing alterations. You would have your own cabin, your independence, and you would be away from the gossips in town. Adam seemed to realize how his proposal might sound and quickly added, "This would be a legitimate business arrangement, Miss Raines. I am not suggesting anything improper. I simply believe that your strength, which so many people seem to view as a flaw, is actually exactly what I need on my ranch." Judith's mind raced. The offer was unexpected, almost shocking, but something in Adam's earnest expression told her he was completely serious. He saw her size not as a source of shame but as an asset, a quality to be valued rather than hidden. "I need to think about this," she said finally. "And I would need to discuss it with Emily. I came here to work with her, of course. Take all the time you need." Adam resumed walking, and they completed the journey to the dress shop in thoughtful silence. That evening, Judith told Emily about Adam's proposal. Her cousin listened carefully, her expression thoughtful. "Adam Irving is one of the most respected men in this territory," Emily said slowly. "He's known for being fair and honest. If he says the arrangement would be proper, I believe him. But Judith, you have to do what feels right for you. I love having you here, but I also know how hard the gossip has been on you. Would you think less of me if I accepted?" "Never." Emily reached across the small kitchen table and squeezed Judith's hand. "I would think you were brave for taking an opportunity to use your strengths in a place where they would be appreciated." Judith spent a sleepless night weighing her options. By morning, she had made her decision. She found Adam at the general store, loading supplies into a wagon, and approached him with her heart hammering nervously against her ribs. "Mr. Irving, I would like to accept your offer, but I need to understand exactly what would be expected of me." Adam's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Come out to the ranch this afternoon. I will show you around, explain everything, and you can make your final decision after you have seen the place. Would that be acceptable?" 3 hours later, Judith sat beside Adam on the wagon seat as they traveled north from Fort Stanton. The ranch occupied a beautiful stretch of land where the mountains met rolling grassland. Ponderosa pines dotted the landscape, and a clear creek ran through the property, providing essential water for the cattle. The main house was a sturdy adobe structure with a covered porch, and several outbuildings included a barn, a bunkhouse for the ranch hands, and a small cabin that Adam indicated would be hers if she accepted the position. "I run about 300 head of cattle," Adam explained as they walked the property. "It's not the biggest operation in the territory, but it's successful enough to provide a good living. The work involves everything you would expect: tending the animals, maintaining fences, managing supplies, helping with branding and roundups. During calving season, we are up day and night. It's not easy work. I am not afraid of hard work." Judith watched a hawk circle overhead, feeling a strange sense of rightness about being here in this wide open space. "I have 3 full-time ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. Good men, all of them. They know I have zero tolerance for disrespect or improper behavior. You would be safe here, Miss Raines. I give you my word on that." They spent the afternoon discussing practical details. Adam explained that her primary responsibilities would involve helping with the daily operations of the ranch, particularly tasks that required physical strength and endurance. He spoke about the business as a partnership, emphasizing that he valued input and initiative. The more they talked, the more Judith felt drawn to the idea of this new life. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange, Adam drove Judith back toward Fort Stanton. But halfway there, they encountered a problem. A section of fence along the road had collapsed, and several cattle from a neighboring ranch had wandered onto the public road, creating a dangerous situation for any travelers who might come upon them in the fading light. "I need to get these animals secured before someone gets hurt," Adam said, already jumping down from the wagon. "This might take a while. Let me help." Judith climbed down as well, ignoring Adam's look of surprise. What followed was an intense hour of work as they herded the wayward cattle back through the gap in the fence, then made temporary repairs to keep them contained until the property owner could fix it properly. Judith discovered that her size and strength were genuine advantages. She could maneuver the heavy fence posts that Adam dragged over, holding them steady while he secured them. She could physically turn stubborn cattle when they tried to bolt in the wrong direction. When one particularly ornery steer charged toward the road, Judith placed herself in its path and stood firm, waving her arms and shouting until the animal wheeled away and rejoined the herd. By the time they finished, both of them were covered in dust and breathing hard. Adam looked at Judith with unmistakable admiration. "Miss Raines, you are exactly what I hoped you would be. Strong, capable, unafraid to get your hands dirty. If you have any remaining doubts about taking the job, please put them aside. I would be honored to have you working at my ranch." Judith felt something shift inside her chest, a loosening of old wounds and insecurities. For the first time in her life, someone saw her size and strength as gifts rather than flaws. "Mr. Irving, I accept your offer." Adam's smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then we have a deal. When can you start?" "Give me a week to help Emily find someone to replace me at the shop and to prepare for the move." They shook hands, and Judith felt the calluses on Adam's palm, the strength in his grip. Something passed between them in that moment, a spark of connection that went beyond a simple business arrangement. But neither of them acknowledged it. Not yet. The week passed quickly. Emily was sad to see Judith go, but helped her pack, and even sewed several practical dresses better suited for ranch work. The town gossips had a field day with the news that Judith was moving to Adam Irving's ranch, despite the fact that she would have her own separate cabin, and the arrangement was entirely proper. Mrs. Henderson made sure everyone knew she found the situation scandalous, though she could point to nothing actually improper about it. On the morning of Judith's departure, Emily hugged her tightly. "You write to me and tell me how you are doing. And Judith, be open to what might happen out there. Adam Irving is a good man, and the way he looks at you is not just about needing help with ranch work. Emily, don't be ridiculous. This is strictly business. Keep telling yourself that." Emily's knowing smile followed Judith as Adam helped her into the wagon, and they set off for what would become her new home. The cabin Adam had prepared for her was small but comfortable, with a sturdy bed, a table and chairs, a wood stove for cooking and warmth, and even a shelf for books. Someone had placed fresh wildflowers in a jar on the table, and Judith suspected Adam's thoughtfulness was behind that touch. "I hope it suits you," Adam said, lingering in the doorway. "If you need anything else, just let me know." "It's perfect. Thank you, Mr. Irving." "I think we can drop the formalities, don't you? Call me Adam." "Then you should call me Judith." That first night in her cabin, Judith lay awake listening to unfamiliar sounds. Cattle lowing in the distance, coyotes singing to the moon, the whisper of wind through pine trees. For the first time in years, she felt something that might have been hope. The work proved every bit as demanding as Adam had promised. Judith rose before dawn and often worked until sunset, her muscles aching in ways they never had when she was doing alterations in Emily's shop. But it was a satisfying ache, the kind that came from honest labor and tangible accomplishments. She helped repair fences, moved cattle between pastures, learned to recognize which animals needed medical attention, and discovered she had a talent for working with the horses. Adam's 3 ranch hands, Carlos Mendez, Joseph Joe Talbot, and Samuel Freeman, treated her with careful respect. They had clearly received instructions from Adam about proper behavior, but as the days passed, their wariness transformed into genuine acceptance. Judith proved herself capable of pulling her weight, never complaining, never shirking difficult tasks. When a fence post needed setting or supplies needed moving, she was right there alongside them, her strength matching theirs. Adam worked beside his crew rather than simply directing from a distance, and Judith found herself paying attention to how he moved, how he thought through problems, how he treated both animals and people with firm kindness. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the rare sound of his laugh, the unconscious grace with which he sat a horse. And she noticed, though she tried not to, the way his gaze sometimes lingered on her with an expression she could not quite interpret. 6 weeks into her employment, disaster struck. A late September storm rolled down from the mountains, bringing not just rain but early snow that caught everyone unprepared. The temperature plummeted overnight, and by morning the ranch was blanketed in white. Adam gathered everyone in the barn at first light, his face grim. "We have cattle scattered across the high pastures, and they were not moved down to shelter before this hit. If we don't reach them soon, we could lose a significant portion of the herd. I need everyone who can ride to come with me. This will be dangerous work in dangerous conditions." Judith did not hesitate. "I'm coming." Adam looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He simply nodded and began assigning tasks. Within an hour, they were riding into the storm, pushing through snow that in places already reached the horses' knees. The cold was vicious, cutting through layers of clothing and stealing the warmth from their bodies. They found the first group of cattle huddled beneath a stand of pines, already showing signs of distress. The real work began, herding frightened, cold animals down treacherous slopes toward the relative safety of the lower pastures. Judith's horse slipped twice on hidden ice, but she managed to keep her seat, her strong legs gripping tight. She shouted herself hoarse, calling to cattle, used her body weight to force stubborn animals to move, and never once thought about quitting despite the miserable conditions. Hours passed in a blur of snow and exertion. By the time they reached the last scattered group of cattle, the light was fading and the temperature dropping even further. Adam counted heads and swore, "We are missing 2 calves. They must have gotten separated and wandered off." "We cannot leave them," Judith said, though exhaustion dragged at her limbs. "I know." Adam looked at his men, who were all showing signs of dangerous fatigue. "Carlos, Joe, Samuel, get the main herd back to the ranch. Make sure everyone gets warm and fed. Judith and I will search for the calves." The ranch hands looked reluctant but obeyed. As they departed with the cattle, Judith and Adam turned their horses back toward the high country, searching for tracks in the fading light. The snow fell harder, erasing signs almost as quickly as they were made. "There." Adam pointed to faint prints leading toward a rocky outcropping. They followed the trail until they heard the frightened bawling of young cattle. The 2 calves had gotten trapped in a narrow ravine, unable to climb out on their own. Adam dismounted and peered down into the ravine. "I will have to go down there and push them up while you pull from above with a rope. Can you do that?" "Yes." What followed was grueling work. Adam scrambled down into the ravine, slipping and sliding on the snowy rocks, while Judith secured a rope around her saddle horn. They managed to get loops around each calf, and Judith used her weight and strength to haul while Adam pushed from below. The first calf came up relatively smoothly, but the second panicked halfway up, thrashing and threatening to drag Judith down into the ravine with it. She dug in her heels, wrapped the rope around her arms for extra purchase, and pulled with everything she had. Her muscles screamed in protest. Her hands burned where the rope cut into them, even through her gloves, but she did not let go. Inch by inch, she dragged the calf up until it scrambled over the edge and stood trembling beside its companion. Adam emerged from the ravine moments later, his face pale with cold and something that might have been fear. "Judith, that was incredibly dangerous. You could have been pulled over the edge, but I was not." She unwrapped the rope from her aching arms, trying to catch her breath. "The calves are safe, because you are strong enough and stubborn enough to refuse to let go." Adam stepped closer, and in the dim light, his eyes held an intensity that had nothing to do with the rescue they had just completed. "Do you have any idea how remarkable you are?" Before Judith could respond, before she could even fully process what she saw in his expression, Adam closed the distance between them and kissed her. For a moment, Judith froze in shock. Then something inside her melted, and she kissed him back, her cold lips moving against his, her gloved hands coming up to grip his shoulders. The kiss tasted of snow and exhaustion, and something indefinable that made her heart race. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adam rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry. That was inappropriate. You work for me, and I should not have taken advantage like that." "You did not take advantage." Judith's voice shook, but not from cold. "Adam, I wanted you to kiss me." "Thank God, because I have been wanting to do that since the day you stepped off that stagecoach looking like the answer to prayers. I had not even known I was praying." Adam cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. "Judith, you are everything I did not know I was looking for. You are strong and capable and beautiful, and every day I work beside you, I fall a little more in love with you." Tears froze on Judith's lashes. "I never thought anyone would say such things to me. I have spent my whole life being told I was too much, too big, too unfeminine to ever be loved. Then everyone who told you those things was a fool." Adam kissed her again, softer this time, tender in a way that made Judith's breath catch. "You are exactly right just as you are. Perfect for this land, perfect for this life, perfect for me if you will have me." They stood in the snow as darkness fell completely, holding each other, and Judith felt years of shame and self-doubt begin to crack and fall away like ice melting in spring sunshine. Here in this wild, harsh land, she had found not just acceptance but genuine love with a man who valued her for exactly who she was. The ride back to the ranch took hours, the darkness and snow making every step treacherous. They had to lead the horses on foot for much of the journey, the calves stumbling along between them. By the time the ranch buildings finally came into view, both Judith and Adam were so exhausted they could barely stand. But they had saved the calves, saved each other from the cold, and discovered something precious in the process. Carlos and Joe rushed out to take the horses and calves, their relief obvious. "We were getting worried," Carlos said. "Samuel is preparing hot food and coffee in the main house. You both need to get warm immediately." In the ranch house kitchen, wrapped in blankets and nursing cups of scalding coffee, Adam and Judith finally allowed themselves to fully acknowledge what had happened between them. Samuel discreetly disappeared after serving the food, leaving them alone. "When the snow clears, I want to take you to meet Father O'Brien in town," Adam said quietly. "I want to court you properly, Judith. I want everyone to know that my intentions toward you are entirely honorable, and eventually, if you will have me, I want to marry you." Judith set down her coffee cup with trembling hands. "Are you certain? People will talk. They already think poorly of me, and this will just give them more reason to gossip." "Let them talk. I do not care what Mrs. Henderson or anyone else thinks." Adam took her hands in his, careful of the rope burns on her palms. "I care about building a life with a woman I love and admire, a woman strong enough to be my true partner in every sense. That woman is you, Judith." They sat together in the warm kitchen as the storm raged outside, making plans and sharing pieces of their pasts. Adam told her about his childhood on the ranch, about losing his father to a riding accident 5 years earlier, about his mother's long illness and death. Judith spoke of her own losses, her difficult years with her aunt, her dreams of finding a place where she belonged. "You belong here," Adam said firmly. "With me on this ranch. This is your home now if you want it to be. I want it to be, more than anything." As autumn progressed into winter, Adam courted Judith with old-fashioned determination. They rode into Fort Stanton together every Sunday for church, sitting side by side in the pew and ignoring the whispers that followed them. Adam made his intentions clear to everyone, and while some people remained scandalized, others began to warm to the idea. Emily was thrilled, already planning what she would sew for Judith's wedding dress. Even some of the women who had initially been cruel began to soften when they saw how happy Judith seemed, how Adam looked at her like she hung the moon and stars. Mrs. Henderson remained stubbornly disapproving, but her influence waned as more people came to respect the hardworking woman who had proven herself on the Irving ranch. Stories spread about how Judith had worked through the early snowstorm, saving cattle and pulling her weight alongside the men. The town's opinion slowly shifted from seeing her as a subject of mockery to recognizing her as someone worthy of admiration. On a clear December day, with fresh snow sparkling on the mountains and the sky a brilliant blue, Adam took Judith to their favorite spot on the ranch, a high meadow where they had often ridden together. He helped her dismount, then dropped to one knee in the snow. "Judith Raines, you have made me happier than I ever thought possible. You are my partner, my best friend, and the love of my life. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" The ring he offered was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small diamond that had belonged to his mother. Judith looked at this man who had seen her not as a burden or a source of shame, but as something precious and valuable, and her answer came without hesitation. "Yes, yes, Adam, I will marry you." He swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing like children. When he set her down, they kissed in the meadow under the winter sun, and Judith felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. They were married on a Saturday in late January 1878, in the small church in Fort Stanton. Emily served as Judith's maid of honor, having created a stunning wedding dress that fit Judith perfectly and made her feel beautiful. Carlos, Joe, and Samuel stood up with Adam, all of them wearing their best clothes and looking unusually formal. The church was filled with more well-wishers than Judith had expected. The ranch community had come to accept her, and many had grown to genuinely respect and like her. Even Mrs. Henderson attended, though she sat in the back and maintained her disapproving expression throughout the ceremony. But Judith barely noticed. Her attention was focused entirely on Adam, on the vows they exchanged, on the promise of a future built together. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the barn that had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. There was music and dancing, and Judith found herself swept into one celebration after another. When Adam finally reclaimed her for a dance, pulling her close as someone played a fiddle, she rested her head against his shoulder and felt peace settle into her bones. "Happy, Mrs. Irving," Adam murmured into her ear. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible, Mr. Irving." Their married life fell into comfortable rhythms. Judith moved from the small cabin into the main house, sharing Adam's bed and his life in every way. They worked side by side during the day, managing the ranch and building their shared enterprise. In the evenings, they sat together by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. And at night, they explored the physical side of marriage with a passion and tenderness that left Judith breathless. Adam never made her feel anything but desired and cherished. He loved her body without reservation, celebrating her strength and size, finding beauty in curves and muscles that others had scorned. In his arms, Judith discovered a sensuality she had never known she possessed, a confidence in her own desirability that transformed how she moved through the world. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. The calving season tested them both, requiring round-the-clock vigilance and hard work. But they managed it together, and when a difficult birth threatened to claim both cow and calf, it was Judith's strength that made the difference. She helped pull the calf free, then spent hours nursing both animals back to health. Adam watched her with undisguised pride and love. In May, Judith realized she had missed her monthly courses. At first, she dismissed it as a result of the hard work and physical demands of ranch life. But when the pattern continued, and she began experiencing morning sickness, the truth became undeniable. She was pregnant. She told Adam one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple. For a moment, he simply stared at her in stunned silence. Then he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to Fort Stanton, swept her into his arms, and kissed her until they were both breathless and laughing. "A baby," he kept repeating, as if he could not quite believe it. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Judith asked, though his reaction made the answer obvious. "Happy does not begin to cover it. Judith, you have given me everything, a partner, a wife, and now a child. I am the most fortunate man alive." The pregnancy was not easy. Judith's size, which served her so well in ranch work, made the physical demands of carrying a child even more challenging. She continued working as long as she could, but eventually, Adam and the ranch hands insisted she take on lighter duties. She chafed at the restrictions but understood their concern. Emily visited frequently, bringing gifts and advice and support. The women of Fort Stanton, even some who had initially been unkind, reached out with offers of help and shared wisdom about childbirth and motherhood. Judith found herself welcomed into a community of women in a way that had been unthinkable when she first arrived in New Mexico. On a cold January morning in 1879, almost exactly a year after her wedding, Judith went into labor. Adam paced the floor of the main house while the midwife and Emily attended to Judith in the bedroom. The labor was long and difficult, testing Judith's strength in entirely new ways. But just as she had faced every other challenge in her life, she endured. When the baby finally arrived, the midwife announced, "It's a boy, a big, healthy boy." Adam burst into the room, propriety forgotten, and went straight to Judith's side. She lay exhausted but smiling, holding a squalling infant with a shock of dark hair and powerful lungs. "Meet your son," she said softly. Adam touched the baby's tiny hand with a finger, his eyes bright with tears. "He's perfect. You are perfect. God, Judith, I love you so much." They named him Daniel Adam Irving, and from the moment of his birth, he was doted on by everyone on the ranch. Carlos, Joe, and Samuel became honorary uncles, competing for who could make the baby smile first. Emily sewed an entire wardrobe of tiny clothes. Even Mrs. Henderson, upon meeting the baby in town, softened enough to admit he was a handsome child. The years that followed brought both challenges and blessings. The ranch prospered under Adam and Judith's joint management. They expanded the herd, improved the property, and became known throughout the territory as fair employers and savvy ranchers. Daniel grew into a sturdy, happy child who clearly inherited his mother's size and his father's determination. When Daniel was 3, Judith gave birth to twins, a girl and a boy they named Sarah Margaret and Thomas Henry. The main house suddenly felt much smaller and infinitely more chaotic. But it was a joyful chaos, filled with laughter and love, and the constant noise of children growing up on a working ranch. Adam proved to be a devoted father, teaching his children to ride and work and respect the land that supported them. He told them stories of how he had first seen their mother stepping off the stagecoach, how he had known immediately that she was special, how her strength and character had won his heart. Judith watched her children grow and felt a contentment she had never imagined possible. Her oldest son inherited her physical presence, growing tall and strong, but she made sure he also learned kindness and empathy. Her daughter Sarah had her grandmother's delicate features but her mother's fierce spirit. Little Thomas was quieter than his siblings but possessed a thoughtfulness that promised future wisdom. The town of Fort Stanton changed around them. New families arrived, businesses opened and closed, and the wild frontier gradually became more settled. But the Irving Ranch remained a constant, a prosperous operation built on hard work and partnership. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Adam took Judith back to the meadow where he had proposed. The children were safely with Carlos and his wife, who had married a few years earlier and lived in a house they had built on the ranch property. It was just the two of them, alone under the vast New Mexico sky. "You ever regret it?" Adam asked, holding her hand as they sat on a blanket spread over the grass. "Leaving the dress shop, taking a chance on a life that was so different from what you had known." Judith looked at this man who had seen past her size to the woman beneath, who had valued her strength when others saw only something to mock, who had given her love and partnership and a family. "Not for a single moment. You gave me exactly what I needed, Adam. Not just a home or work or financial security, but the chance to be truly myself, valued for exactly who I am. You gave me the same gift." Adam pulled her close, and they sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in the brilliant colors they had witnessed together countless times. "I needed a strong woman exactly like you, Judith. Not just for the ranch work, though God knows you have been essential to our success, but for life, for partnership, for love. You are everything to me." They kissed as the stars began to emerge overhead, and Judith felt the same flutter in her chest that she had experienced all those years ago when she first met Adam Irving. The attraction, the connection, the love had only deepened with time and shared experiences. More years passed. Daniel grew into a fine young man, eventually taking over more of the ranch operations as Adam's hair turned silver and his movements became less spry. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son, a respectful young man who clearly adored her. Thomas surprised everyone by showing an aptitude for law, and eventually becoming one of the territory's most successful attorneys. Though he always returned to the ranch for important family events, Judith and Adam became grandparents, delighting in the next generation of Irvings. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had played, and marvel at the life they had built together. Emily remained a close friend throughout the years, though she eventually sold her dress shop and moved to Santa Fe to be closer to her own aging parents. But she visited regularly, and the two cousins would spend hours reminiscing about that hot August day in 1877 when Judith had stepped off the stagecoach and into a future she never could have imagined. When visitors to the ranch commented on Judith's size, which remained impressive even as she aged, Adam would smile and tell them the same thing he had said decades earlier. I needed a strong woman exactly like her. Best decision I ever made was recognizing that strength is a gift, not a flaw. The Irving Ranch became something of a legend in the territory, known not just for its success, but for the partnership at its heart. Young couples would sometimes point to Adam and Judith as examples of what a true marriage should be. Equal partners working together, supporting each other, building something lasting through cooperation and love. Mrs. Henderson eventually apologized to Judith, many years after their initial encounters. The old woman had grown frail and reflective, and one Sunday after church, she pulled Judith aside with tears in her eyes. "I was cruel to you when you first arrived in Fort Stanton. I judged you harshly for no reason other than ignorance and meanness. You have lived a life that puts mine to shame, and I wanted to tell you that I am sorry." Judith, who had long since let go of any bitterness about those early days, accepted the apology with grace. "We were all younger then, Mrs. Henderson. What matters is who we choose to be now." As Adam and Judith entered their 70s, they began to slow down, leaving more of the ranch work to their children and grandchildren, but they never truly retired. Even in their final years, they could be found riding out to check on cattle, sitting together on the porch planning improvements, or working side by side on whatever task needed attention. Adam Irving died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, with Judith beside him as she had been for nearly 50 years. His passing left a hole in her heart, but Judith took comfort in the life they had built together and the family that surrounded her. At his funeral, she spoke about the man who had seen her truly on that first day, who had recognized strength where others saw only something to shame, who had given her the greatest gift possible, the chance to be fully herself and be loved for it. Judith lived another 5 years, remaining active and engaged with the ranch and her family until the very end. When she passed away at 81, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, her last words were about Adam and the meadow where he had proposed, the place where their life together had truly begun. The Irving Ranch continued to prosper under the management of Daniel and his siblings, a testament to the solid foundation Adam and Judith had built. And in Fort Stanton, which had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper city, old-timers would still tell the story of the woman who arrived on the stagecoach in 1877, facing mockery and shame for her size, and the cowboy who had said he needed a strong woman exactly like her. It became a story about looking beyond surface judgments, about recognizing value in unexpected places, about how true love sees the real person beneath external appearances. The small cemetery on a hill overlooking the ranch held 2 graves side by side, marked with simple but elegant headstones. Adam Irving, devoted husband, father, and rancher. Judith Raines Irving, beloved wife, mother, and partner. On Judith's stone, her children had added an inscription that captured the essence of her life. She was strong, capable, and perfectly suited for the life she built. Visitors to the ranch, even decades after both Adam and Judith had passed, would hear stories about the remarkable partnership that had created this thriving operation. They would learn about how Judith had worked alongside the ranch hands, how she had helped build fences and rescue cattle, and manage one of the most successful ranches in New Mexico. They would hear about Adam's unwavering respect and love for his wife, how he had valued her strength when society told her it was something to hide. The story of Adam and Judith Irving became part of the lore of the American West, a reminder that the frontier was shaped not just by gunfighters and gold rushes, but by ordinary people who built extraordinary lives through hard work, partnership, and love. It was a story about finding your place in the world, about being valued for who you truly are, about how the right person can see past society's narrow definitions to recognize something precious and unique. Their great-great-grandchildren, working the same land that Adam and Judith had made prosperous, would sometimes ride out to that meadow where their ancestors had gotten engaged. Standing in that beautiful high country, looking out over the ranch that had been built with strength and determination and love, they would feel connected to something larger than themselves. They would understand that they were the inheritors not just of land and cattle, but of a legacy of respect, partnership, and the courage to value people for their true qualities rather than superficial judgments. The main house, expanded and modernized but still recognizably the same structure where Adam and Judith had raised their children, held treasures from their life together. Photographs showed a large woman and a lean cowboy, always standing close, always with expressions of contentment and love. A wedding dress hung carefully preserved, testimony to Emily's skill, and to a day when Judith had felt beautiful not despite her size, but simply because she was marrying the man she loved. Letters exchanged during the rare times they were apart revealed the depth of their emotional connection and mutual respect. Fort Stanton itself changed dramatically over the generations. What had been a rough frontier town evolved into a modern city, with paved roads and electric lights, and all the conveniences of the 20th century. But even as it changed, the story of Judith Raines and Adam Irving remained part of the community's identity, told and retold as an example of what the best of the West had represented: opportunity, acceptance, and the freedom to build a life unconstrained by the rigid expectations of Eastern society. The dress shop where Judith had briefly worked with Emily had long since closed, replaced by other businesses that came and went with the changing times. But a historical marker noted that it had been the place where two cousins had reunited, where plans had been made that would lead to one of the territory's most successful ranches. Emily's descendants, spread across the Southwest, maintained connections with the Irving family, the two families forever linked by the bond between the cousins who had supported each other through triumph and hardship. In the end, the story of Judith and Adam was simply a love story, but one with particular resonance. It was about a woman who had been shamed for her size, told she was too much and not enough all at once, who had the courage to step into an unknown future. It was about a man who had the wisdom to see past society's prejudices, to recognize a partner who was exactly right for the life he wanted to build. It was about how genuine love is based not on meeting arbitrary standards of appearance, but on mutual respect, shared values, and the recognition of true character. Their children and grandchildren carried forward the lessons Adam and Judith had taught them, not just about ranching, but about life. They learned to value people for their abilities and character rather than their appearance. They learned that strength comes in many forms and should be celebrated rather than hidden. They learned that a true partnership involves equal respect and shared labor, with both parties contributing according to their abilities. And they learned that love, real and lasting love, is built on a foundation of friendship, respect, and seeing each other truly. The Irving Ranch stood as physical proof of what could be accomplished when two people worked together as genuine partners. Every fence, every building, every head of cattle represented the joint efforts of Adam and Judith. They had built something lasting not through the efforts of one person supported by another, but through true collaboration between equals who each brought unique strengths to their shared enterprise. As the 20th century progressed, and then gave way to the 21st, the story of Judith and Adam remained relevant. In times when women were still fighting for equal recognition of their abilities, when people were still judged harshly for not meeting narrow beauty standards, when strength in women was sometimes viewed with suspicion rather than admiration, the tale of a frontier woman and the cowboy who valued her exactly as she was provided inspiration and hope. The meadow where Adam had proposed became a favorite spot for Irving family gatherings. Multiple generations would spread blankets on the same ground where their ancestors had sat, sharing meals and stories under the vast New Mexico sky. Young couples in the family, navigating the complexities of modern relationships, would be told about Adam and Judith's partnership and encouraged to build their own relationships on similar foundations of respect and equality. The land itself seemed to remember them. The creek still ran clear and cold, providing water for cattle that were descendants of the herds Adam and Judith had tended. The mountains still stood watch over the valley, unchanging witnesses to the human dramas that unfolded beneath their peaks. And the wind that whispered through the ponderosa pines carried echoes of conversations held long ago, of laughter and arguments and quiet moments of connection between two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. In the end, what mattered was not the gossip or judgment Judith had faced when she first arrived in Fort Stanton. What mattered was not the narrow-minded opinions of people like Mrs. Henderson, who could not see past their own prejudices. What mattered was that Judith Raines had found Adam Irving, and he had found her, and together they had built a life of meaning, purpose, and deep, abiding love. What mattered was that she had been shamed for being large, and the cowboy had said he needed a strong woman exactly like her, and he had meant every word. And they had proven that real love transcends society's superficial standards to recognize and celebrate what truly makes a person valuable. Their story ended not with grand, dramatic gestures, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a family well raised, a partnership honored and sustained through decades of joy and hardship. It ended with two people who had loved each other truly and completely, who had faced the world as partners, who had built something lasting together. It ended, as all the best love stories do, with the certainty that what they had found together was rare and precious, and worth every challenge they had overcome to achieve it. And on the Irving Ranch in New Mexico, where the mountains meet the grasslands and the creek runs clear and cold, the legacy of Judith and Adam Irving lived on in the land they had worked, the family they had raised, and the example they had set for how two people can create something beautiful when they see each other truly and love without reservation or condition. Their story became timeless, a reminder that real love looks past surfaces to recognize the extraordinary in another person, that strength is always valuable regardless of who possesses it, and that sometimes the best love stories begin with someone brave enough to say, "I need a strong woman exactly like you," and mean it with their whole heart.